Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. Picture this: a game of high-stakes bluffing played with nothing but the serial numbers on a dollar bill. Now imagine the chairman of Wall Street's most powerful firm, a man they call the King, striding across a trading floor where billions are being gambled every second. He stops at the desk of his best trader, the undisputed champion of this game, and issues a challenge that would make most people's knees buckle. "One hand," he says, voice low and dangerous. $1 million. No tears. That single moment captures the entire spirit of an era, an age of unimaginable wealth, unrestrained ambition, and a culture so ferocious that its members literally describe their own workplace as a jungle. Today, we're diving into Michael Lewis's masterpiece, Liar's Poker. This isn't just a book, it's a time capsule from another planet. It's a first-hand account of the Wall Street boom of the 1980s, written by a young man who stumbled, almost by accident, into the epicenter of a modern-day gold rush. This book became an instant classic, selling well over 1 million copies and defining a generation of finance. It ripped back the curtain on a world that was secretive, powerful, and frankly a little insane. Michael Lewis wasn't a journalist peering through the windows. He was inside, living it. He was a bond salesman at the legendary firm Salomon Brothers, the undisputed king of the trading world. And what he witnessed there, the lessons he learned about money, greed, and human nature, are as relevant today as they were back then. By the end of our journey, you'll understand the mindset that allowed a handful of young, often unqualified people to make more money in a year than most earn in a lifetime. You'll see how fortunes were built not just with genius, but with nerve, bluff, and an almost brutal understanding of human weakness. This isn't just a story about finance. It's a story about the game of life, played at the highest possible stakes. Our story begins not on the trading floor, but with a young Michael Lewis himself, a recent graduate with a degree in art history, feeling utterly unqualified for the world of high finance. In the early 80s, there was one clear path for ambitious young people: land an analyst job on Wall Street, attend a top business school, and worry about the rest of your life later. Lewis tried this path and failed spectacularly. He was told he lacked, quote, commercial instincts. One firm actually laughed at his resume. So how does a self-described Southern boy in a white linen suit end up at the most aggressive firm on Wall Street? Through a chain of events so improbable it feels like fiction. Living in London, he gets invited to a dinner with the Queen Mother. He's seated next to the wife of a managing director from Salomon Brothers. She's a force of nature, brash, loud, and utterly unimpressed by British royalty. While the rest of the room stands in silent reverence, she yells out, "Hey Queen, nice dogs you have there." In that moment, Lewis sees something irresistible in the Salomon Brothers culture. They were, as he puts it, the bleacher bums of the financial world. Crude, rude, but undeniably authentic. This woman, a product of that culture, promises him a job on the spot, telling her husband to take care of it. And just like that, after a few half-hearted interviews, Lewis finds himself with an offer to join the firm's legendary training program. He's told he'll be paid $48,000 a year, which in 1985 was a staggering amount for a 24-year-old with no experience. It was twice what his professors at the London School of Economics were earning. As he puts it, there was no justice in the world, and thank goodness for that. This windfall wasn't happening by accident. The 80s had unleashed a perfect storm for bond traders. A change in policy by the Federal Reserve in 1979 meant that interest rates, which had been stable, were now swinging wildly. And since bond prices move in the opposite direction of interest rates, the once sleepy bond market transformed overnight, from a safe place to store wealth into a casino where fortunes could be made. At the same time, America, its government, its corporations, its people, was borrowing money at a rate never seen before. The national debt exploded. This meant the sheer volume of bonds to be traded skyrocketed, and Salomon Brothers, the scrappy firm that had always dominated the unglamorous world of bonds, was perfectly positioned to cash in. They were, as one trader memorably put it, toll takers. They carved a tiny fraction out of every massive transaction that flowed through their desks. A Salomon salesman might sell $50 million of IBM bonds to a pension fund, and the trader would skim off over $60,000 for the firm in a fraction of a second. Do that hundreds of times a day, and you begin to understand where the money was coming from. So Lewis arrives for his first day at Salomon Brothers, ready to collect his lottery winnings. He enters the training program with 126 other ambitious young men and a few women, and it's here that he gets his real education. The training program was less a school and more a brutal sorting mechanism. It was designed, as one speaker put it, to prepare them for the jungle. "Ya gotta think a Salomon Brothers is like a jungle," the speaker drawls. "The trading floor is a jungle, and the guy you end up working for is your jungle leader." This wasn't just a metaphor, it was the operating philosophy of the firm. The trainees were immediately pitted against one another in a fierce competition for the best jobs. A placement board hung like a guillotine, with the best jobs, like trading mortgages in New York, representing unimaginable success, and the worst, like equities in Dallas, representing a fate worse than death. This pressure cooker environment created a stark divide in the classroom. Up front sat the grovelers, the ones Lewis calls the front row people. They were mostly from top business schools, constantly asking questions to ingratiate themselves with the speakers, their lips puckered, ready to kiss up to anyone with power. In the back sat the hooligans, the back row people. They feigned indifference, threw paper wads at managing directors, and slept through lectures. They believed that to succeed at Salomon, you had to shed any refinement you had. You had to become a savage. And they looked down on the front row people for not understanding the game. It was in this chaotic environment that the true culture of Salomon was passed down, not through textbooks, but through war stories. The trainees learned that success wasn't about tenure or pedigree. It was about making money, period. If a new employee could make millions of dollars come out of his telephones, he became the most revered person in the jungle, a big swinging dick. The term was crude, but it perfectly captured the raw, macho ambition that drove everyone. After a big trade, a managing director might call across the floor, "Hey, you big swinging dick, way to be!" It was the ultimate prize. Everyone wanted to be a big swinging dick, even the women. To survive this jungle, you needed a rabbi, a powerful mentor who would protect you. And to get a rabbi, you had to create the illusion of being desirable. It was a game of perception. Bosses wanted you only if other bosses wanted you. It was your first lesson in market psychology. And then there was the game that defined the culture more than any other, liar's poker. Imagine a group of traders, each holding a dollar bill. The game is to bluff about the serial numbers on those bills. One player makes a bid, say 3 sixes, meaning he believes there are at least 3 number 6s across all the bills in play. The next player has to either bid higher or challenge. The game, Lewis explains, was a perfect metaphor for bond trading. It tested your nerve, your ability to read people, and your tolerance for risk. A good player asks the same questions a bond trader asks. How cunning is my opponent? Is he bluffing? How can I exploit his ignorance? It was a world where you sought weakness in others and tried to hide it in yourself. And at Salomon, the king of this game was a trader named John Merriweather. He was thought by many to be the best bond trader on Wall Street. He was cool, calculating, and had an almost supernatural ability to control the two emotions that destroy most traders: fear and greed. This brings us back to that incredible opening scene. The chairman, John Gutfreund, the King of Wall Street, as Business Week had called him, was a former trader himself, but now he was a manager, removed from the action. He was a king who didn't control the loot. His producers, the risk-takers like Merriweather, did. So he walks up to Merriweather, the king of the game, and challenges him. One hand, $1 million, no tears. It was a stunning, almost insane act. Gutfreund wanted to prove he was still a player, that he still had the courage of a trader. But Merriweather was a master. He spent his days avoiding dumb bets, and this was the dumbest of them all. If he won, he'd upset his boss. If he lost, he was out $1 million. There was no upside. So, in a brilliant move of liar's poker, before the game even started, Merriweather counters. "No, John," he says calmly. "If we're going to play for those kind of numbers, I'd rather play for real money. $10 million, no tears." 10 million. Gutfreund, for all his bravado, couldn't accept. He'd only have about 30 million left if he lost. He smiled and backed down, telling Merriweather, "You're crazy." But Merriweather knew the truth. He wasn't crazy. He was just very, very good at the game. This story reveals everything about the soul of Salomon Brothers. It was a place where guts and the willingness to bluff were valued above all else. And nowhere was this more true than in the most profitable, most feared, and most bizarre corner of the firm, the mortgage bond department. This is a story within a story, and it's the heart of liar's poker. Before the late 70s, home mortgages were considered small, messy, and insignificant by Wall Street standards. They were handled by the presidents of local savings and loan institutions, men who belonged to what was known as the 363 Club. They borrowed money at 3%, lent it out at 6%, and were on the golf course by 3 in the afternoon. They were sheep, not the wolves of Wall Street. But a few forward-thinking people at Salomon, including a man named Louis Ranieri, saw an opportunity. The mortgage market was actually the largest capital market in the world, bigger than the stock market. The challenge was to turn messy individual home loans into standardized, tradable bonds. Louis Ranieri was the perfect man for the job. He was the ultimate Salomon legend. He started in the mailroom, a college dropout from Brooklyn, and clawed his way onto the trading floor. He was loud, brash, and, in the words of one colleague, a fat slob. He built the mortgage department in his own image, Italian, self-educated, and fiercely loyal. His first traders were guys from the back office, guys without fancy degrees. They called themselves the Black Sheep Squadron. For years, the department was a joke. They made no money. The rest of the firm, with its new focus on hiring polished graduates with advanced degrees, looked down on them as a bunch of uneducated thugs. Then, in October 1981, everything changed. Congress, in an attempt to save the collapsing savings and loan industry, passed a tax break that forced these institutions to sell off their old mortgage loans. Suddenly, $1 trillion worth of debt was for sale, and there was only one real buyer in the market, Louis Ranieri and his band of traders. It was, Lewis writes, as if a fire hydrant burst directly upon a group of thirsty street urchins. The savings and loan presidents were desperate and, more importantly, ignorant. They didn't understand the value of what they were selling. They were the ultimate fools in the market, and Ranieri's traders took full advantage. They were mean gluttons, not just for food but for profits. They would buy loans from a thrift at 75 cents on the dollar and immediately flipped them to another for 85 cents, making $10 million in a heartbeat. One trader, when a thrift president hesitated at such an unfair trade, bluntly told him, "If you don't do it, you're out of a job." The mortgage department became a money-printing machine. In 1982, they made $150 million. In 1985, they made $275 million. They were a tribe within the firm, a brotherhood of hoods, who reveled in their outsider status. They ate cheeseburgers for breakfast and played elaborate pranks, known as goofs, on their trainees. In one infamous goof, they convinced a new trainee, Matty Oliva, that he was being investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission for stealing food from the company cafeteria. They even got John Gutfreund himself to participate, calling the terrified young man into his office to lecture him on the ethics of stealing cheeseburgers. When the truth was revealed, Matty was so humiliated he bolted from the trading floor in tears, ready to quit forever. But he came back. He had to. He was bound by golden handcuffs to the most profitable department on Wall Street. This was the world Michael Lewis was navigating. As a new salesman in London, he was a geek, the larval state between trainee and man. His job was to call people he didn't know and sell them things they didn't want. He learned quickly that trusting a Salomon trader was a terrible mistake. In his very first trade, he was tricked into selling a client a block of AT&T bonds that a trader had been desperate to unload. The client lost a fortune and was fired. Lewis learned a crucial lesson. "Who do you work for?" the trader asked him. "This guy or Salomon Brothers?" The message was clear. The customer comes last. But Lewis was a quick study. He found his own rabbis, two brilliant salesmen he calls Dash Riprock and Alexander. Alexander, in particular, was a master of the markets. He taught Lewis to think like a contrarian, to do the opposite of what everyone else was doing. He taught him to look for secondary and tertiary effects. When the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, everyone focused on nuclear stocks. Alexander immediately bought oil futures, knowing the disaster would increase demand for oil. Then he called Lewis back and said, "Buy potatoes." Of course, the fallout would contaminate European crops, increasing demand for American potatoes. It was this kind of thinking, seeing the connections no one else saw, that separated the masters from the amateurs. By mimicking these mentors, Lewis transformed himself from a geek into a big swinging dick. His crowning moment came when he sold a massive $86 million block of bonds that no one else in the firm could move. The deal was a huge priority, and its success brought him calls of congratulations from the highest levels of the firm, including a profane but heartfelt christening from the legendary trader known as the Human Piranha. But just as Lewis was hitting his stride, the firm itself was beginning to crumble from within. The very culture that had made Salomon so successful, its raw aggression, its focus on individual profits, its internal rivalries, began to tear it apart. The three main divisions, governments, corporates, and mortgages, were like warring families. The leaders of these families, Tom Strauss, Bill Vout, and Louis Ranieri, were appointed to an office of the chairman to help Gutfreund run the firm, but they just continued their turf wars at a higher level. The firm was also bleeding talent. Young, brilliant traders like Howie Rubin, a former professional blackjack card counter, would make tens of millions for the firm, only to be paid a fraction of that because of a rigid compensation system. Rubin made $25 million for the firm in his first year and was paid just $90,000. He soon left for a competitor who offered him $1 million a year guarantee. This became the pattern. Salomon Brothers became a training ground for the rest of Wall Street, letting its monopoly on talent and markets slip through its fingers. The ultimate symbol of the firm's decline came in July 1987. John Gutfreund, pressured by his rivals in the office of the chairman, fired Louis Ranieri, the man who had built the firm's most profitable business from nothing. The king had been exiled. The covenant, as Ranieri called the old loyalty of the firm, was broken. The mortgage department, the heart and soul of the old Salomon, was purged. The firm was adrift and vulnerable, and in September 1987, the wolves came knocking. The corporate raider Ronald Perelman, backed by Salomon's arch-rival Drexel Burnham and its junk bond king Michael Milken, launched a takeover bid for the firm. It was the ultimate irony. Salomon had missed the junk bond revolution, dismissing it as a passing fad. They had stood by while Milken built an empire that eclipsed their own, and now that very empire was coming to swallow them whole, using the financial tools they had ignored. Gutfreund, in a desperate move to save his job, turned to the investor Warren Buffett, offering him an incredibly sweet deal to become the firm's white knight and fend off the raid. Buffett's investment saved Gutfreund, but it cost the company's shareholders a fortune, over $100 million by Lewis's calculation. Just a few weeks later, the chaos reached its peak. On October 19, 1987, the stock market crashed. The firm was caught with huge, losing positions in a massive British Petroleum stock offering and the failed Southland junk bond deal. At the same time, it had just fired its entire money market department, the very people who could have profited from the flight to safety that was occurring in the markets. It was a perfect storm of mismanagement and bad luck. For Michael Lewis, these events were the final act. He had entered this world chasing a fortune, and he had found one. He was paid $225,000 after his second year, more than anyone in his training class. The firm, panicked by its loss of talent, was finally trying to buy loyalty, but Lewis realized something profound. He had lost his belief in the money. He saw that the outrageous sums being paid had little to do with one's value to society. He saw that the hunger for more was insatiable. You only attained new levels of relative poverty. He had learned the game, he had won the game, and now he no longer needed to play. And so, at the peak of his young career, with a guaranteed path to becoming a millionaire ahead of him, he walked away. He left the jungle, not because he was disillusioned, but because he had learned the most valuable lesson of all. The game itself wasn't worth the price of admission. What a wild ride. Liar's Poker is more than just a snapshot of a crazy decade. It's a timeless exploration of ambition, culture, and the corrupting nature of easy money. One of the most powerful ideas in the book is the concept of the jungle. Salomon Brothers wasn't just a company. It was an ecosystem with its own brutal rules of survival. And the number one rule was, eat or be eaten. This created a culture of incredible short-term performance. It rewarded aggression, nerve, and a killer instinct. But as Lewis so brilliantly shows, that same culture ultimately consumed the firm from within. The intense internal competition, the lack of loyalty, and the focus on individual gain over the firm's long-term health were the very things that led to its decline. It's a powerful reminder that culture isn't just a buzzword. It's the invisible force that can either build an empire or bring it to its knees. Another striking lesson is about the nature of markets and the people who play in them. Lewis repeatedly shows us that markets are not always rational. They're driven by fear and greed, by perception, and by the herd instinct. The most successful players, like John Merriweather or the character Alexander, weren't necessarily the ones with the most complex mathematical models. They were the ones with a deep, intuitive understanding of human psychology. They knew how to spot the fool in the market, and they understood that the greatest opportunities often lie in betting against the crowd. But perhaps the most personal and profound lesson is the one Lewis learns about himself. He enters this world believing, as many of us do, that the amount of money you earn is a measure of your worth. But his experience on the trading floor shatters this belief. He sees firsthand that the rewards are often disconnected from real value or contribution. He discovers that the endless pursuit of more money doesn't lead to happiness, but to a state of relative poverty, where you're always comparing yourself to the person next to you. His decision to walk away from a guaranteed fortune is the ultimate act of a true contrarian, betting on himself and his own values rather than on the market's definition of success. So what can we take away from this? First, understand the culture of any game you decide to play. Whether it's a company, an industry, or a team, the unwritten rules and the values of the jungle will shape your experience more than any official handbook. Know what you're getting into. Second, learn to think about psychology, not just numbers. In any competitive environment, success often comes from understanding what motivates other people, their fears, their biases, their herd mentality. Learn to read the players, not just the cards. And finally, define your own version of success. It's easy to get caught up in the chase for money, status, or what Michael Lewis calls being a big, swinging dick. But as his story shows, winning that game can sometimes feel like losing yourself. The real victory is figuring out what game you truly want to play, and then playing it on your own terms. That was the book summary of Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. We've certainly hit the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary can only take you so far. The real magic of this book is in the details, the dialogue, the incredible characters that feel like they've walked straight out of a Scorsese film. A summary gives you the map, but reading the book is like taking the journey yourself. If any part of this wild ride has sparked your curiosity, if you want to truly feel the energy, the greed, and the sheer absurdity of 1980s Wall Street, then I encourage you to grab a copy. The link is in the description below. It's more than a book about finance. It's a masterclass in storytelling and a cautionary tale that everyone, especially the young and ambitious, should experience. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to explore more of the landmark books that have shaped the minds of leaders and thinkers, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep growing together.